Hey everybody, welcome to the Football Savant podcast. I'm Travis Tyler. That's Tyler Williams, and we're here to talk about Week 10 in college football and preview the games for Week 11 and discuss whatever else from around the college football world may pop into our heads. So Tyler, let's jump right into it. Uh, Ohio State went on the road against Northwestern, got a bit more of a test than people expected. Is there anything to make of those struggles, you think, or is it just a one game scenario?
Well, if you check Twitter or you ask any of my Buckeye buddies, man, they've all suddenly become meteorologists. It seems like, man, it's all about the weather. It's like,
Yeah.
listen, man, this was the game. I've had Ohio State ranked number one for much of the season until recently with Tennessee. This is the game that was kind of the final straw for me to move Michigan over Ohio State in the rankings.
Uh,
After what Michigan did to Penn State, which is not a slouch defense, rushing for over 400 yards. Uh, Granted, Ohio State played them on the road later in
yeah.
the season against Penn State, but just did not fare well. We've talked in recent weeks, Travis, about some of the struggles with the offensive line and what Ryan Day likes to do,
Yep.
and it's all centered around run and play action. Michigan seems to be getting better every week, and Ohio State seems to be regressing every
Okay.
week. So, and unfortunately, yeah, you can say, well, some bad weather there. We weren't able to get things started, but you got a big matchup coming up against Michigan. And guess what? That's not in a dome. I mean, and we're
Yeah.
getting later into the season in the Northeast and the Midwest where the weather's going to be bad. I mean,
Yeah.
Northwestern's a bad program, Travis. They have one win, and it was against another country, against Nebraska, who's a
Yeah.
dumpster fire of a program right now themselves. So
Yeah.
that it was kind of the final straw for me. I don't know if you saw anything different, Travis.
Yeah. What I saw was basically what we're saying. Michigan just looked like they're getting better each week. You can make your arguments for Ohio State going into this game, but then I saw them continue to struggle with that offensive line in this game. They didn't run the ball very well. I mean, Northwestern, I guess apparently there's a pretty good defensive lineman on Northwestern, but defensive line made the Ohio State offensive line not look as good as it should against Northwestern,
one Hundred percent.
or as good as they've looked against a lot of other decent uh, defensive lines. And my initial response to this question would have been, it's not really that big a deal. Look at how much Georgia struggled with Missouri earlier this year, and like these games happen, but
I agree.
it just the more I think about it, less physical Ohio State seems to be, and that's kind of been their identity, and that's really where they need to improve. And plus,
Spot on.
CJ Stroud, I think, had an awful game. Uh,
He did.
Statistical, I mean, you can kind of blame the wind on that a little bit when it's the throwing game, but you gotta get used to the elements up there in the Big Ten country.
And you're absolutely right, Travis. And this isn't something that's new to Ohio State. I mean, this is a conference opponent. This is weather that they play in. They don't play in a dome. I mean, this
Yeah,
this this shouldn't be that big. I mean, if we're talking,
I mean the championship
two,
game will be in a dome if we're being honest,
it
but
will.
yeah,
It will. But if this was USC, fast forward 2-3 years and they're in the Big Ten and they struggled against Northwestern or they were in Bloomington, Indiana, and they struggled. Okay, I'll give you that. But this is Ohio State who's used to this, and every Buckeye fan is telling me the weather, the weather, weather. I'm like, dude, you played against a program that doesn't have a win in this country this year. Like, you're Ohio State. Like, come on, at some point in time, I get it. The weather wasn't
yeah.
great, but that they should have blown the doors off of Northwestern.
Yeah, yeah, especially with those running backs that they have. From a talent standpoint, they're such a complete team. The win shouldn't be something that they're leaning on blaming for a loss, or well, not a loss, but for a close game.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you, Travis, based on what you've seen from Michigan and what you've seen from Ohio State, and I'm not trying to get a way too early prediction for that game, but I won't speak for you, but for myself, for most of the season, I've had Ohio State in the back of my mind winning that matchup coming up. It's not only became 50-50, but it's starting to tilt towards Michigan for me. What's your early projection on that?
I mean, the fact that it's in Columbus kind of saves Ohio State right now. Just
I
the
agree.
fact that it's their home field. But if they don't pick things up with their physicality and their toughness, they're gonna just get absolutely wrecked because I mean, their offense can keep up, especially if Smith and Jigba comes back and they add that other receiver there. Um, but they need to play a lot tougher than they have so far, and that's really, I think, what I've seen from them all season.
And you can be sure that Jim Harbaugh's teams will play tough and they will be ready for
Yeah,
that game in
well,
Columbus.
that's my point. They got to show up because Michigan's going to show up, and they're even though they won last year, they're going to be hungry to show that they're there to stay, which
It wasn't a
hasn't been
fluke.
the
Yeah.
case recently. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
You're spot on.
so let's move over to the SEC. We had a little bit of an upset there. Uh, Bama going down for the second time this year. LSU with the win in OT. Is this the end of the Bama dynasty?
It's a great question, and it's the question that you're seeing on ESPN and every college
Yeah.
football show you turn on. Look, I think you can make a case either way. Personally, I think Bama will be just fine, but I can see where people would kind of come up with this theory because LSU's playing with not a great roster. And certainly not a typical LSU roster flooded with NFL talent. And the entire reason Brian Kelly left Notre Dame was he wanted to play Saban with the same amount of NFL guys. He was never going to be on an equal playing field coaching at Notre Dame. It's too tough there academically. And I've said this for years, and we're seeing it now. And I think we're going to continue to see it, excuse me, for at least the next couple of years at Notre Dame. Is it's tough to recruit guys there. I mean, they have a legitimate academic standard. And I say all that to say that I don't think anybody thought that Brian Kelly would beat Nick Saban year one. And that didn't feel like a fluky game, Travis, where the ball
Yeah.
just bounced LSU's way a bunch of time. I mean, aside from going for it in overtime on the first possession, going for the 2-point conversion, that was a pretty equal game.
Yeah.
Uh, Kirby Smart continues to suck all the oxygen out of the room and stealing those 5-star kids that, particularly on
Yeah.
defense, Saban would have got. Now you've got Kiffin. Now you've got Mike Leach. Now you've got Josh Heupel, plus whoever takes the Auburn job, which, by the way, could be Hugh Freeze, who beat Saban twice in the SEC and just dog punched Arkansas with
Yeah.
Liberty, right? So I
Yeah.
can see why some people would say that, but here's why I think they're fine ultimately, Travis, is when I watch Bama, it's pretty clear to me what's different than other years, minus the explosive receivers that they've had as of late. It's the offensive line, Travis. If you
Okay.
remember back
Yeah.
to a few, not even that long ago, but just a few years ago, they had backs that were averaging 4.5 yards before contact. Fast forward right now, Travis, they're 116th in O line penalties per game,
Oof.
124th in run block rate, and 109th in total blown block rate. They gave up 20 pressures to LSU. I mean, you can't win ball games like that. So,
Yeah.
while I think it's getting tougher for Bama because of the coaching and because of the conference just seems to be elevating, even though I didn't think that would be possible for the SEC.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bet against Saban to not be able to recruit offensive line and defense. So I learned my lesson betting against Saban and Brady.
Yeah.
I'm not going to continue to do it. And really, honestly, if you look at the season, even with the bad O line play, Travis, and not the explosive receivers they've had, look what it's take to beat them. They lost
Yeah.
on the road in Knoxville, which was insane, and on the road in Baton Rouge.
All at the last second too.
I wouldn't go. I mean, you're seeing that. It's a fair question.
Yeah.
Is Saban and Bama done? So I think it's a fair question, but also I look at it from a 30,000-foot view and go, wait a minute. I think they might be okay. What's your take, Travis?
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with everything you're saying, and I would also point out that I think it was 2010, something around there, back when they had Julio Jones and a bunch of other talented guys.
Yeah,
They went 9-3 and didn't make it to even it was BCS era. They didn't even make it a BCS game. I think it was they played Michigan State. I know that was very traumatic event for me. But they went 9-3 and just went to like a normal New Year's Day bowl in Florida. And then after that, they just went on this big run. It didn't really affect their recruiting or anything at all. I do think that like the newer era with like NIL and that stuff could have a little bit of a challenge for Saban's staff, but it's still an Alabama program that's got a bunch of history, and I think they're going to be fine.
I agree. And it's funny you mentioned that time period because they were loaded with talent looking back, like you said, with Julio. And I remember people saying, like, oh, Saban's getting a little older. And here
Yeah,
we are 10 years later, and we're saying the same things. And one of the things I hate is that when the media asks questions like, oh, is Saban done? Is this the end of the Bama dynasty? We're taking away from what Brian Kelly's doing at
yeah,
LSU, and it's really impressive.
that's
He's
a hell
using
of a
a
first
quarter,
year.
yeah, with a quarterback who was playing in the soft Pac-12, right? I mean, he's a transfer quarterback,
Yeah,
so I'm really impressed with what Brian Kelly's doing at LSU. I don't know if it's the end of Bama's dynasty, but it's going to get a lot tougher in the SEC.
yeah. I think the answer to that question is always if you're going to err on the safe side, it's no. Always err on the side of caution. Then, if Saban's not there at some point, maybe we're having a different discussion. But yeah, that I would completely agree with all that sentiment there. How about TCU jumping up into the top four this week after another undefeated win? What's your take on the Horned Frogs right now?
Yeah, I used to live up in the Fort Worth area. I still live in Texas. I was at a golf tournament this past weekend with a bunch of guys that live up in that area, and a lot of big college football fans, and a lot of them asking me, does TCU control? Are they in the driver's seat? Do they control their own destiny? And it's funny because as they were asking me, I started thinking in my head. I didn't say it, but I'm thinking in my head, I don't know. I
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
say so. I think let me put it this way, Travis. I think so if they win out. With
Okay.
Bama
Well,
losing and Clemson particularly losing, I
yeah,
think it kind of takes care of that if they go undefeated and win a Power Five conference championship.
yeah.
I don't think if I'm the committee, Travis, I could leave them out over a two-loss SEC team no matter what I think or want to see what happen, what's right is right. Now, with that being said, they still have to go to UT in Austin.
Yep,
They still got to go to Waco and play
yep.
Baylor. And then they finish up hosting Iowa State, which is before they even get to the Big 12 championship, Travis. I
Uh,
think they drop one of those. I'm not
okay.
wishing that on them, but I think I think
There's a lot
Texas
of
or Baylor
pressure.
could be a loss. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I agree with
100%.
that. And those two teams in Kansas State are right now tied for second place, right behind TCU right now. And then if things get chaotic, you still have Kansas and Oklahoma State technically still in that picture, but in the conference that is obviously not playoff potential. But
Let me ask you, I saw a little bit of a raised eyebrow there when I said they may drop one of those. Do you think they win out?
that was more of me trying to figure out which one I think you could be uh talking about them losing.
I,
It
I
wasn't,
think it's
yeah,
UT. I think it's UT
yeah, yeah.
personally.
That's the one that I would see because Baylor's been on and off this year. Iowa State is not a great team this year. Texas, that crowd is going to be relentless this weekend, and
And they've played well,
two
and
ranked teams.
they're in
Yeah,
kind of a position where they've got nothing to lose, man. So they're going to throw it all at you. And even if they beat UT and Baylor, Iowa State could be tricky. You're right that it is a
it's a
down
hard place
year,
to
but they're
play.
going to be.
Yeah,
It's a hard place to play. They're going to be looking ahead, I'm sure, a little bit to the Big 12 championship. And Sonny Dykes, great coach, not taking anything away from him. He's never been in this position though. This is
no,
going
he
to be
hasn't.
tough
He
to win
hasn't.
out for
Yeah,
TCU.
yeah, yeah. I think the closest he's probably been has been the SMU years with the couple of those 10-win teams or whatever they had, but he's never had this much on the line in his career.
So just to make you do you think they drop one?
Yeah, I'm not comfortable saying which one they drop. It could be all the way to the Big 12 championship and they drop the championship. But I
Fair
mean,
enough.
I do think there's a loss in those next four games somewhere.
The good thing though is if you're Sonny Dykes and Max Duggan and your TCU, you ultimately do control your own destiny. I mean, you
Yeah,
you take
and
care
that's
of
all you can
business
ask
and
for
win
at
and
this
you're in.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, Exactly. How about the other ranked team? The ranking teams came out, or the new rankings came out earlier tonight. You had a chance to take a look at those and have some thoughts on that at all?
Uh, yes, I think for the most part, they got it right. I really don't have a whole lot of argument. I mean, you could kind of argue maybe 5 and 6, Tennessee and Oregon. There could be a little bit of a debate there, but I I think for the most part, I don't really have an issue with it. As I kind of alluded to earlier, if I were in charge, the one move I would have made was I would have put Michigan ahead of Ohio State. I think Michigan up to this point has been more impressive. And the thing with the committee is they always tell us it's about what you're doing on the field. It's not about what you did last year or the recruits that you have incoming. Well, it's a little tough for me to believe that, because if you go by that standard, I have a hard time saying that Ohio State, up to this point, if we're just solely judging Travis on play, that Ohio State's been better than Michigan this year.
Yeah, I think between those two, I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier. I think there are certain games on each one of them you could point out where the other one could be better. But I think overall, Michigan, as much as it pains me to say it, has looked a little bit better, especially in recent weeks, especially uh, overcoming that halftime deficit at Rutgers. I know it's Rutgers. Rutgers isn't like a quality program or anything, but just the fact that they were able to turn that around so quickly uh, when Ohio State still struggled with a similar program in the same somewhat similar environment. I think the crowd was a little more into it at Rutgers for the most part, but and then with in terms of the rankings, I think there's a lot of opportunities for some teams in there. I was a little surprised that Clemson was still in the top 10, even though they only have one loss. There might be another one. I don't remember what their schedule looks like, but there might be another one coming there. Um, and then there's a lot of Pac-12 teams between like 7 and 12 that could jump right in there. I think that puts the Pac-12 in a pretty good position for a one-loss team. But they're going to need some things to go their way in there, and then I think a team that people have kind of written off a little bit. Ole Miss is still alive in a lot of this with their game against Bama this weekend. They're tied with Bama in the standings there in the SEC, but they have a better record overall with just one loss overall. So there's a lot of different ways that could shake out.
100% agree. Yeah, yeah. A lot of these teams, I mean, I personally, I think 1 through 8 at this point, I mean, are all viable. I mean,
Yeah,
if you handle business, I mean, I don't know if there's a way for Alabama to climb back into it at 9. I certainly don't think Clemson should be able to, even if
yeah.
they win out. I mean, at this point, I mean, I just don't think that anybody thinks that they're one of the 4 best teams in the country, regardless of what they do for the rest of the season. So, it's gonna be a fun rest of the season for sure.
Yeah. And on that, who who would you say would be the biggest winner from this past week's games?
Well, naturally, I want to say us, because you called the Pitt over Syracuse upset, and I
Yeah,
called
yeah,
the Notre Dame over Clemson.
yeah.
I would
Two for
love to
two, yeah.
anoint, yeah, I would love to anoint us as the biggest winners. A couple of them really stick out, Travis. One, Georgia, secured a spot in the playoffs. They've had a little bit of a rough go outside of absolutely destroying Oregon in week 1. But even if they put themselves in a position where even if they lose the SEC championship, they're still in my opinion. Dominant performance. I mean, their defense had 10 sacks coming into that game, and they get 6 against Tennessee and the Heisman frontrunner and Hendon Hooker. I mean, it was just an all-around pretty
Hmm.
dominant display. Uh, Tennessee as well, I still would consider them a winner, because I think if they win out, I still think
They
they
could still
get
get in.
in
Yeah,
as 11-1. Your only losses to Georgia. I think you win. In fact, I would make an argument, Travis, that they're not any worse position than they were, before playing Georgia.
I think that's a
Uh,
fair point. Yeah,
yeah. So And then also, not to sound like a homer here, but Oregon as well. I think their path is a little more clearly defined. They just have to kind of take care of business and hope that TCU loses.
Yeah.
Couple things here real quick. Oregon's won 8 straight since their opening loss to Georgia in week 1, which is a neutral site game, but it was really basically in Athens. Since then, they've won. They've handled UCLA, and unlike Ohio State and some other teams we talked about, they aren't getting caught looking ahead and letting some of these bad teams kind of hang around to the end. Bo Nix, we've talked about him in recent weeks. He's playing unreal. He's without a doubt earning a trip to the Heisman Award ceremony. Bo currently has 22 passing touchdowns, 13 rushing touchdowns, a receiving touchdown, and a 2-point conversion. That's 218 points that Bo Nix is responsible for. That's number 1 in the country. So they're playing really well. And Oregon doesn't get, and I'm not just saying this because I'm an Oregon fan, but they don't get taken seriously nationally. And some of that is because in recent years, the Pac-12 hasn't been a very good conference. And some of it is because a lot of these media companies, ESPN, their offices are in New York, Connecticut. So they play late night West Coast football. A lot of people don't always stay up to watch the games. But here's something that's interesting is Oregon's currently on an 8-game winning streak. Through that winning streak, Travis, they're averaging 40 or more points per game. That's the longest streak in the nation. In fact, in the history of college football, Travis, there's only been 21 8-game winning streaks where teams have averaged 40 points or more. 5 of those belong to Oregon out of 21. Not a single school, not Bama, Ohio State, USC, Clemson, Michigan, has more than 3. Oregon's got 5. So I think it's time we start taking them serious. At least I want to say that anyway. Maybe I'm just trying to convince myself, Travis.
Hey, whatever you got to do to stay sane, man. But you bring up a interesting point. They did get housed by Georgia in that first game, so that kind of brings up the question here of, is there really a benefit to scheduling those types of games when you're a team that's trying to make it into the playoff? And
Great question.
Seems that Alabama playing some of these little Murray State or something like that is getting a little more attention than a big time loss like that would be.
Phenomenal question, Travis. It's, in my opinion, it seems no, because let's look at it. Oregon schedules a non-conference game week 1 against Georgia. It's a neutral site game in Georgia. They get absolutely, I'm not going to make any excuses or try to sugarcoat it. They got absolutely rolled in that game.
Yeah.
They've won 8 straight since. We just talked about averaging 40 points per game. If they don't schedule Georgia and they schedule, Dartmouth or, pick somebody, they're top 4. They're probably top 4 in the country right now. So while the committee kind of wants us to believe that, you need to put your best 4 out there, if you're a Power 5 school, or if you're a school in a Power 5 conference, I don't think there is. I mean, again, look at Utah. They just scheduled a home and home series with Florida. Utah has, for most of the year, been in the top 10 or just outside. And if they don't schedule Florida, their season may look a lot different. So I don't know what your opinion is, Travis, but for me, it just doesn't seem like there is a big benefit to scheduling a tough non-conference opponent.
Yeah, I'm with you on that part of it. I would say the only benefit, really, I mean, there could be like monetary value benefit and all that, but there also, the only benefit is if you actually pull off the upset in that game, because then you're just sitting pretty. Everything else, you're just if you don't pull it off, you dig yourself a deep hole just to be in the season, and that's not a good spot to be in.
Yeah, great question. I think you're spot on there. Absolutely, I agree with you.
So let's keep going kind of with that Oregon theme a little bit with Dan Lanning here. Just real quick, mutual interest between him and Auburn. What kind of stock are you putting into that?
Look, I don't know. He heavily denounced it at a press conference as soon as it came up. I don't know if that comes from a message board or if they actually do have mutual interest. Here's what I'll say, though. As an Oregon fan, because of the rumors now, and they could have been spread by his agent, Oregon's probably going to be under pressure, though, to sign Dan Lanning to one of these 10-year, $95 million contracts. I love Dan Lanning. If I'm Morgan, though, there's zero chance I do that. Let's look at some of these contracts. Jimbo Fisher, how's that looking? $85 million buyout.
Yeah, we talked about
Not
that one before.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to kick you while you're down, but Mel Tucker, and he's young into that, but what did he? I mean, he had a good season or two at Colorado. They signed him to a huge contract. It's not looking particularly great. I mean, there's a bunch of these cases where we're signing these coaches that haven't proved it a lot to these 10-year, $90 million contracts. If I'm the AD of a school, there's zero chance I do that. Listen, I'll pay you, but I'm going to give you at most a 5-year, 30, $40 million contract. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I wouldn't do it. And if he wants to go to Auburn, good luck to him. If he wants to go to that grinder, by all means.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think a way you could get around that kind of is kind of have incentive-based contracts in there, incentive-based language. Got to hit certain marks before you can get the payday that you're expecting.
And I agree with you, and I would love to see that. But I think here's the tough issue is if you're Oregon or anybody and you say, okay, you want to leave, there's rumors of you having mutual interest. All right, we're going to give you a 9-year incentive-based contract, but then Florida State or Auburn says, we'll give you 10 years, 90 million guaranteed.
Right. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
gonna run. You're gonna, but I don't. If I'm Morgan, I don't take it. Go. We'll get the
find a
next
cheaper option.
Yeah, yeah. I just don't. I think it can set a program back. And you and we've talked about it on this podcast before. What it does when these coaches don't live up to those expectations and they get fired early on into the season. I mean, we've got umpteen Power 5 job openings right now. We've talked about what that does to recruiting and the kids and the recruiting cycle as a whole, not just the kids that are on campus right now. It's not good for a program.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. So let's jump ahead to this week now. What games are you looking forward to this weekend? What's on your radar?
Man, I'm all in on Tulane.
Yeah.
No, I am interested. We talked about that, I think, last week or the week before. The AAC race finally, just for once, not
I think
being
that was
just
last
Cincinnati.
week. Yeah.
Tulane's, they're undefeated. I mean, Willie Fritz is crushing it over there. Side note, Travis, now we're looking up Willie Fritz's resume before the podcast, and if you haven't seen it, it's very impressive. Long list of blue blood programs.
Yeah. I was gonna say it's impressive in what he's doing right now.
It is. Obviously, it's for Oregon. It's happy I hate Husky week. It's rival. We hate Washington, so that's going to be a big one. I think we've got some ACC matchups with like Wake Forest and
Wake Forest, North Carolina.
That's
one.
There's some good matchups. I know there was a couple that you were looking forward to, Travis.
Yeah. That Tulane one I will mention is if UCF wins that one, then technically there's a 3-way tie at the top of the AAC,
which is between who?
Tulane, UCF, and Cincinnati would all be 5-1 in conference at that point. So
I don't think anybody had anyone other than Cincinnati coming out of that conference.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, especially when they were willing to go to Arkansas to start the year.
Yeah,
but like we said last week, I think the Cincinnati offense in particular looks a lot different than it did in the past couple of years.
Great point.
And so that's kind of where their struggles have been a little more this year. You mentioned the Washington-Oregon game, the Bama, Ole Miss, TCU, and Texas is going to be a huge one.
Yeah,
I mean, that's one that you really got to earn if you're TCU. That'll really help your case in the playoff if you go win that one.
Here's one, Travis, that caught my eye. I don't know why this is the case, but number 7 LSU goes to Arkansas.
That's the next one I was about to bring up.
Arkansas's only getting 3 points after they just got
that's
rolled by Liberty.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, especially the way LSU's clicking right now. It doesn't. I mean, Arkansas
Is there
doesn't
something there that I'm missing?
No. I don't. I'm with you on that. That is a great thing for you to bring up. I have no idea where that's coming from. I mean, Arkansas doesn't have a slouch of a defense or anything, but LSU is just clicking on all cylinders right now, and Arkansas is kind of in that little lull, a little. You have peaks and valleys. They're at a valley in their season right now. So I mean that. Yeah, I don't have an explanation for that.
I don't either. Does Mississippi State have a chance against Georgia, Travis? Could that be an interesting one?
Mm, I mean, that's a great question. Mississippi State has a great passing game, but to me, that that looks a lot like the way Georgia just absolutely pummeled Hendon Hooker in the pocket last week, and just Tennessee had a fantastic offense, and like Mississippi State's a lot in the same vein, and I just don't think that their line can really hold up against the Jalen Carter and those guys.
That's fair. That's fair. Um, Let me ask you this. Tennessee, they've had some emotional games. They just lost, obviously, the big one at Georgia. Missouri is not a good program. Is there a chance that they could get caught? That's a 12 p.m. kickoff. So that's one of those SEC kind of early noon kickoffs. Is there any chance they get caught looking ahead? I'm looking for upsets here.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any upsets in the SEC this
Okay, so
weekend.
you're
Yeah,
thinking it's chalk.
I don't see. I can see some close games. I don't see them actually finishing the deal on any upsets there. I would say I would say Wake Forest over North Carolina would be a pretty good one. Wake Forest has that offense. Neither team has a great defense. Wake Forest has the offense to keep up with North Carolina,
You are
and
right.
I believe that game's at Wake Forest too. So
That is at Wake
that
Forest,
that
and that's
could
a
help.
7:30 kickoff too.
Yeah, yeah, and then the Baylor Kansas State game could be interesting too in Waco. So
Well, I'm just going to do it, and I'm going to say,
gotta
give
go for
me.
the big one. Yeah,
I am. Give me Texas over TCU in Austin.
that's not the big one I was expecting, but okay.
I know it wasn't. I know it wasn't. I
That's
know,
a good
but I
one.
wanted to keep you. I wanted to keep you
Yeah,
off guard. No, I do
yeah.
think. I do think if Quinn Ewers in Texas plays as well as they have in some of these games, TCU could find themselves on the rope in one of those nighttime kickoffs. Austin gets wild. I live there. It gets crazy.
Yeah, it does. That's again not an easy place to play again. But yeah, there you have it, guys. Thanks again for tuning in this week, and be sure to follow, like, subscribe, share. Find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, footballsavant.com, wherever else you get your podcasts. We're on most of those platforms. For other sports news, you can check out my other show, Travis on Sports, also on the same platforms and everything. And Tyler and I will be back for some NFL talk later this week. But other than that, it's been the Football Savant podcast.
Let's see if we can go 2 for 2 on upsets.
Technically, it'd be 5 for 5
Yeah, that's
if
right.
we're
Five for
going over
five.
the whole season. Yeah, yeah.
All right,
All
guys.
right,
We'll
we'll
see
see
you.
what
We'll see you
happens.
later this